Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We have an absolutely wild stack of sources today.
We really do.
We are taking you on a journey that it starts with contemporary geopolitical hardball. We're talking targeted U.S. military action.
And somehow it spirals into deep history, domestic political chaos, and then a really profound personal spiritual reckoning.
Involving plant medicine, of all things.
Right. It sounds like three totally different conversations, but the genius of the source material is how it weaves them all into one single coherent worldview.
And what's that central theme?
It's this idea of an ongoing ancient and existential battle between divine order, or logos, and just utter destruction, which the source calls chaos.
Okay, so that's the mission. We're going to unpack a mindset that connects, say, targeting a foreign leader with who is really in charge of our institutions at home.
And why facing your own mortality might be the only sane way to get through all this. It's a shortcut to understanding a very powerful narrative right now.
Let's do it. Let's start right in the deep end. The calculus of American power abroad.
So the entry point for this whole discussion is the apprehension of Nicolas Maduro. The source material frames this action as a perfect illustration of the current strategic thinking. They call it the Trump approach to foreign policy.
Which means?
Basically, using these targeted surgical strikes, special operations forces, Delta, SEALs, to remind the world of U.S. power, but, and this is the key part, avoiding those catastrophic multi-decade occupations.
Like Iraq and Afghanistan.
Exactly.
And what's immediately clear is that this approach is based on a specific and, frankly, pretty brutal lesson learned from those wars.
Which was what?
The source argues that interventions in places like Iraq and Libya failed spectacularly, not because we chose war, but because policymakers completely failed to grasp the local political physics. You mean like the need for a strong central power?
That's it, exactly. The source argues that a place like Iraq is an artificial construct. It's only held together by the sheer force of a strong man like Saddam Hussein.
He was terrible, yes.
But he was the necessary gravity keeping all these disparate, often warring religious sects from just flying apart when the U.S. removed him without a plan for that structure.
Instant chaos.
Guaranteed chaos that we couldn't contain. It's a very pragmatic, if cynical, view of stability versus idealism.
And this leads to a key difference the source highlights when looking at Venezuela. They argue that Latin America operates on a similar operating system to the U.S.
Right, rooted in European influence, the Catholic Church.
So it's not like the Middle East, where there's no shared framework for modern governance.
Exactly. In Venezuela, you have that shared cultural language. The suggestion is that political replacement and then stability is just inherently easier there because the underlying architecture, that operating system, is familiar.
So you're less likely to see that total structural collapse we saw in Iraq.
That's the theory.
So if the goal is stability, maybe not idealized democracy, then this is a huge departure in strategic thinking. The source points to the decision to appear to back figures like Delcy Rodriguez and her brother.
Yeah, this wasn't about finding some democratic darling.
No. It was about making sure some structure remained intact.
Precisely. The goal becomes minimizing chaos. Previous regime changes, they prioritized speed and sometimes just ignored the power vacuum they were creating.
But this new model is about structure, about continuity.
Even if the replacement figures aren't universally liked, yes. It signals a shift from idealism to just raw geopolitical control and stability.
This pragmatism then connects to a massive historical parallel. The author mentions reading Gibbon's Decline and Fall.
And having this epiphany.
Right. That the relevant moment for the U.S. isn't the final collapse of Rome in 476 A.D. It's the transition from republic to empire centuries earlier.
This is where it gets really interesting. They argue the U.S. is now firmly in its empire stage, whether we want to admit it or not.
What's the difference in their view?
Well, the Roman Republic was about a certain kind of virtuous, maybe narrow self-governance. But the empire was defined by accepting its global reach.
Just running the tables, dealing with threats pragmatically?
Yeah. And often ruthlessly, yes. And if the analogy holds, the source is saying the U.S. should just stop resisting its imperial role.
We see that in the Venezuela action. Openly seeking oil, removing a bad actor, setting the terms.
It's the U.S. finally embracing its reality as the global power broker. The debate then shifts. It's no longer if we are an empire, but how we govern as one.
So the external drive is order, structure. But at the same time, this source suggests that this external control coexists with an accelerating internal spiritual chaos.
And that brings us right to the domestic climate. This internal struggle is where we encounter a highly charged concept, anarcho-tyranny.
Okay, that's a powerful and honestly a deeply confusing term. How can a state be both anarchy and tyranny at once? Who is the law for?
It describes a situation where the law is highly selective. The tyranny is for the law-abiding citizen.
The person getting a ticket for a minor violation dealing with overregulation.
Exactly. Meanwhile, the anarchy is for the criminals and the destructive elements who are basically allowed to operate with free rein.
So it's not that law is absent, it's that it's being weaponized.
Weaponized against the obedient, yes, while genuinely destructive forces, drug addicts, repeat violent offenders are tolerated or just released. The source argues this is a deliberate political maneuver
To weaken the system.
to weaken the existing traditional order.
And this environment, according to these sources, isn't just about bad policy. It's about outright political violence. And, we have to stress these are serious claims from the source material we're analyzing.
Absolutely. The document alleges specific instances, an incident at J.D. Vance's home, and these unverified claims about the reported murder of Charlie Kirk by an Antifa-adjacent person.
And the source doesn't frame these as isolated crimes.
No, it frames them as part of a coordinated campaign to instill deep, paralyzing fear in anyone who opposes the ruling paradigm.
Which brings up the essential question for the source.
Yeah.
Why? Why this drive for select and disorder? And this is where it pivots from political observation to profound spiritual interpretation.
The claim is that all this political and social chaos, whether it's the French Revolution, the Bolshevik Revolution, or what's happening now, it's not fundamentally a political disagreement.
What is it then?
It's a manifestation of a deep spiritual war, a war between divine order, or logos, and the forces of evil and dissolution, which they call chaos.
So logos is structure, truth, connection.
The foundational rule set for the universe, yes. And chaos is the raw, destructive anti-force that's just seeking annihilation. The political battlefield is just the tip of the iceberg.
And this framework is then used to interpret actual institutional policies. The source takes a highly controversial stance here.
It does. It argues that the main form of institutionalized hate in the U.S. today is anti-white hate.
And they cite specific structural examples for this, right?
Yes. They point directly to affirmative action in police and fire hiring, corporate quotas. Things they allege are designed to specifically penalize white individuals. They argue white men have been a generational punching bag for decades.
But then the source complicates this. It's not a simple racial war, they say.
Right. To prove the conflict is spiritual, not purely racial, they offer this historical analogy they call the Irish Rosetta Stone. It's a devastating argument. The source reminds us of the colonization and starvation of the Irish. That was white Irish people being systemically punished by the white British.
So the logic is, if the war were purely racial white versus non-white, that wouldn't make any sense.
There'd be no rational explanation for it, or for the modern pressure on the Irish to pay restitution in the current identity climate.
I see. So by showing that chaos will target any group seen as upholding order, regardless of skin color, they believe they've confirmed the root conflict is spiritual.
Exactly. It's about destroying order, not just one race oppressing another. And this goes even further. The source makes the dramatic assertion that the ruling class is partly driven by demonic spirits.
Wow.
They even cite the alleged presence of occult artwork within the Department of Justice as, tangible if metaphorical evidence.
The conclusion is chilling. It's that the bad guys aren't just cynical. They take their destructive religion quite seriously. That incredible sense of an existential chaotic threat. It leads us to the final and most intensely personal section of this deep dive.
Confronting mortality and the search for divine communion.
The author talks about this intense personal shift toward constantly meditating on death. Memento mori.
And what's so counterintuitive is the result. Instead of becoming neurotic, dwelling on death actually led to a profound sense of calm, of peace.
How does that work?
If the fear of death is the root of all other anxieties, then accepting it completely, it just dissolves that foundational fear.
And this wasn't some academic exercise, it was forced.
It was forced through a multi-year experience with ayahuasca, which the source describes not as recreation, but as a forced spiritual intervention by God to confront his own folly, a massive reckoning.
The specific insights from these journeys, they really stick with you.
They do. The speaker described the overwhelming feeling of being dead and the immediate crushing realization that his family was not okay.
Because he'd been so focused on money.
Right. He thought securing their financial future was what mattered, but he realized it was an avoidance. They needed his actual love, his connection, not just his money. It exposed all this deep-seated trauma he had about growing up poor.
And then there's that humility realization
Yeah.
in the time loop.
That's fascinating. He was forced to relive a moment where he showed extreme arrogance, not even learning the name of a helper who was carrying these heavy buckets for him.
He just saw the person as furniture.
Which is the lesson, right? You can talk about logos and chaos all you want, but if you treat the person helping you as an object, you are practicing chaos in your daily life.
He also directly confronted the trauma of his childhood home, a place he resented.
And the ultimate realization was that he had all the love in the world in that house, but he couldn't see it because his obsession with money blinded him.
And then there's that moment of transcendent insight.
Seeing a Gandalf-like figure who declared with immense sadness, it's not supposed to be this way.
Referring to the broken communion between people.
Yeah.
The isolation, the hate.
Yes. And this whole experience, it led to a dramatic change in his personal theology. He rejected what he calls martyrdom theology.
The idea that you have to be crucified or become a political lightning rod.
And instead embraced divine communion.
Memeing.
Charity, empathy, focusing intensely on your family, your community. This commitment to love and presence is framed as the actual fight against the kind of annihilation we saw with the Bolsheviks.
Where they literally lined people up and shot them to dissolve the social fabric.
That is the chaos they are fighting against.
But, and this is crucial, the source issues a fierce warning against just casually using this stuff.
A huge warning. They stress that ayahuasca is not a light activity. It is a monumental undertaking that can blow up your whole life.
So it should only be considered by people for whom the risk is already warranted.
Like veterans battling crippling addiction or suicidal thoughts, where the potential for destruction is already sky high. For everyone else, the real work, the homework, is accountability and love, right here on Earth.
So what did this entire sprawling journey mean for you? This deep dive really forces us to reconcile the brutal realities of American power with this essential, hidden spiritual truth.
That whether we acknowledge it or not, life is a relentless defining battle between logos and chaos.
The new ethos distilled from this journey seems to be one of radical honesty.
Confronting your own trauma, expressing genuine love, and living with accountability because, as the source emphasizes, tomorrow is not promised.
They said the experience burned out all the glibness.
Exactly. A rejection of the superficial and an embrace of seriousness. Your focus has to be on love and presence.
And here's the provocative final thought we want to leave you with. The source material suggests that the domestic chaos, the political warfare, it's driven by dark spiritual forces aimed at internal dissolution.
But the geopolitical exercise of American power, like that Venezuela approach, is driven by a desire for order and structure.
So if the U.S. is truly in its empire stage, can it successfully maintain external order in the world while it's simultaneously facing an intensifying spiritual war for its own internal soul?
We'll leave you to wrestle with that connection, and we'll see you on the next Deep Dive.